On the right side, here we have an old steel head frame from the early 1900s. They would use that steam-powered winch to haul that bucket full of gold ore up out of the mine shaft. Then they would dump the bucket down that chute to fill up the ore cars. Then they'd haul the ore cars out to a place called the stamp mill, where they would crush the ore and separate the rock from the gold. Now, right after we pass this telephone pole on the right side, if you look out that way, you're going to see a great big hole in the ground. That is the Wasp mine. Now, today it's an open pit mine or a strip mine, but it started out as one of the 4 large underground mines that were out here. What happened was a family bought that claim in 1983. They opened it back up and began strip mining down there, and by 1985, they had pulled about 1,500 ounces of gold out of that hole. Also off to the right, out by that old blue dump truck, you'll notice a couple of smokestacks sticking up between those concrete walls. Those are coal-fired steam boilers, and they're out there because back in the old days, all of the mining equipment at all the different mines out here, it all ran on steam. There were boilers like those scattered all around the whole mining district. Those 2 boilers powered the main shaft and the head frame of the Mammoth mine, which is the second of those 4 large underground mines that I'll talk about. The Mammoth was by far the largest and the most productive of all the mines out here, and it was also the deepest. The main shaft went straight down 1,058 feet. As we come out from under the trestle, the Mammoth was located off to the right, behind that pile of dirt with that little ore car in front of it. The third of those 4 big underground mines is also out there to the right. Out behind that gray metal building with the red roof is the Black Queen mine. Now, back in the early days, there were more than 100 separate mining claims out here, but they were all what's called surface mines or placer mines. And what that meant for the miners was they would locate a claim, and then they'd come out here with a pick and a shovel, and they'd scrape and scratch at the surface, never deeper than 10 feet down. They'd gather what ore they could, and then they'd have to move on and try to find another claim. That all changed one day when a fellow from Colorado showed up out here. He was a mining engineer and an investor, and he had learned all about underground mining from his Colorado experience. So he looked around down here, he liked what he saw on the surface, and he bought the 4 biggest mines out here and converted all 4 of them into underground mines. And that's what really started the gold boom here at Goldfield. Underground mining was a lot more efficient and productive, and it was a whole lot more profitable than surface mining. Now, the 4th one of those big underground mines was called the Bulldog Mine, and it was located out ahead of the train, beyond those power lines, at the left end of those hills out there, where that great big boulder is sticking up. That's about where the Bulldog Mine was, and they say that that boulder used to actually look like the head of a bulldog. In fact, you can almost see the ears on it. Well, one day some of the miners got a little bit rambunctious, and they went up there to play with their dynamite, and they wound up blowing the whole face right off that boulder. There may have been some liquor involved. Nobody knows, because they never caught those guys. And now if you look over to the left, you'll get a lovely view of the town with the mountain behind it. The prospecting actually started out here in the 1860s, but very few people were brave enough to come out and try their hand at it because Apache Indian raids were still fairly common back then, and this whole area was well known as a dangerous place to hang out. A couple of brave souls did venture out here though, and they did find some gold. And by 1891, the Apache raids had subsided, and word had gotten back to civilization about the gold strikes happening out here, and all of a sudden people just started to flood into the town. It seemed like everybody was coming out here from everywhere to see if they could get in on a little bit of the action. And so the town began to grow, and it grew very quickly, until at one point there were 3 saloons operating here, along with about 30 other businesses. They had the mercantile store, of course, and they had a blacksmith shop and livery stable and a boarding house. They had a butcher shop and a bakery and a brewery. They even had a one-room schoolhouse for the children. The population at that point was around 1,500 people. And of those 1,500, about 500 were the actual miners. But the miners and their families, they really didn't live in the town proper. They lived all around the town, out here in the surrounding desert, in canvas tents. It was a tough way to make a living, but they were some really tough people. And it was real good money. So they all stuck to it. And more of them kept showing up out here all the time. And then in 1893, the postmaster at Mesa City, which was the closest town back then, they realized they'd been sending a whole lot of mail out here on the stagecoach. So they sent somebody out to investigate. And that person came back and reported that there were now more than enough people out here for Goldfield to be able to have its own post office. So in 1893, a U.S. post office opened up here. And only a month or two later, still 1893, the town was granted the charter that it had applied for. And that charter meant that we were now officially recognized as an incorporated city out here in the old Arizona territory. Keep in mind that this is almost 20 years before Arizona became a state in 1912. Well, things went along really great for a few years. It seemed like everybody out here was making a ton of money. Not only the miners, but also the business people in the town. But then something happened up at that old mammoth mine that changed the course of the town's future. The miners, being miners, well, they were drilling and blasting some more. They were trying to extend their tunnel a little farther out along the ore body and make the main shaft of the mine a little bit deeper, when one day they inadvertently drilled and blasted their way straight into the side of a huge subterranean aquifer, an underground lake, if you will. Well, that water poured into the mine like a mighty river, and it filled the mine almost up to the surface. Miraculously, nobody drowned that day. I suspect that nobody was working down on the 1,000-foot level when this occurred, because all the miners made it up to the surface and to safety. However, things looked really bad for the mammoth mines. They tried and tried to pump all that water back out, but no matter what they did or how many pumps they put on the job, the water just kept coming in faster than they could get rid of it. And eventually they had to decide that there was just nothing more that they could do for the mine. And really, the only option that remained was simply to shut it down and walk away. So the mammoth mine was abandoned. But our intrepid friend from Colorado, he wasn't done yet. He still had his 3 other mines. So he pulled his people off the mammoth and he sent them out to his other mines and put them to work there to see if they could expand and improve those operations. And that went along fine for a time, but eventually, one by one, all 3 of those remaining underground mines ran into the same underground aquifer to shut down. So now, all of a sudden, things are looking real bad for the whole town, because all the underground miners, they just up and left. And the surface miners had scraped up about all the surface that they had legal claim to, so they were taken off. And that meant that the business people in town no longer had anybody to buy their wares or do any kind of business with. So they started closing their shops and packing up and moving out. And before you know it, there was almost nobody left out here. And one day the folks at the post office, they must have looked out the front door and said, hey, there's nobody left out here. There's maybe a dozen people in the town. There's hardly any mail going in or out anymore. We really can't afford to be running a post office like this. We're going to have to close. And so in 1898, only 5 years after it had opened at the peak of the boom, Goldfield Post Office shut down and Goldfield officially became a ghost town. Well, we're just about back at the station now, so I want to thank you folks for riding along with us today. We appreciate you taking some of your time and spending it out here with us, learning a little bit about our history and helping us to keep our town alive. By the way, if you enjoyed the trip and you'd like to leave a little tip, you'll find a tip box at either end of the platform. Gratuities are never expected support will be gratefully accepted. Anyway, folks, once again, thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon here in Goldfield.
I don't think that's real. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
We're like, hey.